Hello! This is Heidi Holycross-Lui at the University of Northern Colorado. Today you're going to meet a new verb tense. We're going to talk about Unit 12 with the present perfect progressive. We'll also talk about the differences between the present perfect and the present perfect progressive. This video is a little bit difficult, so you'll want to pay close attention to it and pause when you have to understand what's on the screen. Let's go ahead and get started by looking at a unit overview. In the other videos, we talked about present perfect being an unfinished time period. Well, sometimes it discusses a finished action as well. Typically, the present perfect is used to discuss how much someone has done, how many things that person has done, or how many times someone has done something. And you also use since and for. For present perfect progressive, it focuses on the fact that an action is not finished, and it discusses how long something has been happening. You can also use since and for with this tense as well. We'll go into more detail, but that's just a quick overview. Okay, so let's look at some examples. I have it divided into present perfect and present perfect progressive. If you look at the present perfect tense, it says the climate has changed many times. The present perfect progressive says the climate has been changing for many years. Looking carefully at the present perfect sentence, how do you form the present perfect tense? This is review, you should know this. We have the subject plus have or has plus the past participle to form the present perfect. Easy, right? You should know that really easily by now. Let's look at the present perfect progressive. How do you form that tense? Go ahead and pause and write it down. To form the present perfect progressive, you have the subject plus have or has plus been, and then the present participle. Present participle is just a fancy word for the ing form of the verb. So if you look at the sentence, has been changing is in the present perfect progressive. Let's look more specifically at the meaning that these sentences have. So if you look at the present perfect, the climate has changed many times. It means that the climate has changed many times in the past, but we don't know how many times. We also don't know when the climate changed. We only care about the fact that the climate changed. And we don't know if the climate is changing now or not. If you look at the present perfect progressive, the climate has been changing for many years. This sentence states that the climate started changing in the past and continues to change. We don't know when it started, but we do know that it is happening right now, and that's what's important. Okay, so let's spend a little bit more time discussing the form for the present perfect progressive. Let's look at these sentences carefully and write down the pattern to form the negative form of present perfect progressive. Go ahead and pause and try to figure it out on your own. If you figured out the negative form of the present perfect progressive as the subject followed by have or has plus not plus been plus the present participle of the verb, you did a great job. Good work. We're still focusing on the form. If you look at all of these sentences, they're yes/no questions. So go ahead and write down the pattern for how you form yes/no questions with the present perfect progressive. If you figured out that the form is have or has plus the subject plus been plus the present participle, again, you did a great job. let's continue looking at the form for the present perfect progressive. These are WH word questions. Go ahead and write down the pattern that you find in these questions. If you wrote that you start with the WH word and then have or has plus the subject plus been plus the present participle, you did a great job. Let's go ahead and look at some example answers for these types of questions. We'll start with the WH word questions and then move on to the yes/no questions. How long has she been attending UNC? You would answer with the amount of time. For 2 years, for a long time. If you move down to the last two questions, these are yes/no questions. Have Americans been feeling happier? Yes, they have. No, they haven't. Let's review a little bit. We have two sentences here. People have been designing homes that use less energy. An engineer has designed a car that uses the sun for power. Which tense is the first sentence in? If you remembered that that's the present perfect progressive, great job. If you keep looking at that sentence, we can answer the next question. Are people still designing homes that use less energy? Yes, they are. So this is an example of an unfinished action. Remember that if there's an unfinished action, we use the present perfect progressive. Let's focus more on the second sentence. What tense is that sentence in? Of course, it's in the present perfect. So if you look at that sentence, is the engineer still designing a car that uses the sun for power? No, he isn't. He's finished with designing the car. So this is an example of a finished action. So let's look more specifically at the differences between these. So in present perfect, the finished action has a result in the present. If you look at the examples, she has lived in Colorado since 2007. This is unfinished, and it began in the past, and it will continue into the future. It also has since, so you use the present perfect. If you look at the next sentence, she has been working at UNC. This is an unfinished action. She's still working at UNC, but we don't have since or for, so we use the present perfect progressive. Alright, so let's look at this conversation. Sally says, "Mark, you look tired." Mark replies, "I am. I've been exercising." So which tense is the underlined sentence, "I've been exercising"? This sentence is in the present perfect progressive, right? But when do you think Mark finished exercising? Do you think he finished a long time ago or a short time ago? He must have finished a short time ago because we use the present perfect progressive for actions that ended in the very, very recent past. We can also see the result in the present right now. Sally could see that Mark looks tired, so that's an effect from his exercising. So there's a be careful note in your book, and there are certain verbs that we don't usually use in the progressive tense. These verbs include the ones that show the 5 senses. So verbs like taste, smell, see, touch, and hear. And then stative verbs, words like seem, think, and feel. So you won't use these in the present perfect progressive, just like you don't use them in the regular present progressive. Alright, so let's review what we've already covered. If you look at the chart under present perfect, it talks about how much plus a finished action, how many things plus a finished action, how many times plus a finished action. But for an unfinished action, you have to use since or for. The example sentences: I've talked to a lot of people. I've mailed 3 packages. He's called me twice. She's lived in Texas for 10 years. For the present perfect progressive, it's how long plus an unfinished action. I've been studying for 3 hours. He's been cooking for an hour. They've been working all day. Go ahead and pause and study that chart. Sometimes English is a little bit tricky, so sometimes present perfect and present perfect progressive have the exact same meaning. So if you look at the 2 sentences above, she has worked in Africa for a year, and she has been working in Africa for a year, these sentences mean the exact same thing. There are some verbs that work this way: live, study, teach, and work. If you use these with both since or for, they will have the exact same meaning in both present perfect and present perfect progressive. This is Heidi Holycross-Lui, and I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that the differences between present perfect and present perfect progressive are clear to you.